Whiskey Tango, wind 240 degrees, 9 knots, clear to land, runway 29.
Clear land, runway 29 to Whiskey Tango.
An action by an impetuous youth or an international political rat's nest? Could it be both? Neither? Let's find out who the young pilot is who flew a Cessna 182 onto a Chile air base in Antarctica and why he got stuck there on this episode of Taking Off. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken. A couple of days ago, I posted a video about Ethan Guo's story, the teenager at the time, who was traveling all 7 continents in a small plane to raise money for cancer. After posting my video, I found that a significant amount of my information, based largely on AP news reports and a few other mainstream sources, had some pretty big inaccuracies, and I pulled that video down. I've found the court documents translated to English, listened to the actual ATC audio of the event, and have come to some conclusions which might be a whole lot different than what you've been hearing. Plus, I've now gotten to talk with Ethan and got a clearer picture of what's happening right now at the bottom of the world. Is Ethan a spoiled Gen Xer expecting everything to just be dropped in his lap? Or is he a driven young man trying to make a difference? Let's answer those questions and more. Ethan Guo grew up in New England and recently lived in Florida. As a child, Ethan wanted to fly. He had his first flight at 13 and was hooked, and got his private pilot certificate at the youngest age possible when he turned 17. Now, right off the bat, some of you will leave comments like, "Must be nice to have daddy's money," because we know that learning to fly is expensive. Well, while Ethan did get some help from his parents for flight training, he had to figure out how to pay for the rest. He worked hard waiting tables to pay for his half of the flight training. Also, while in his young teens, his cousin he was very close to came down with cancer, and he started to think about ways that he could try and make a difference. And when he got that pilot certificate at 17, he decided to try for the record of the youngest pilot to fly around the world, which his parents did not financially support, with Ethan's goal to raise money for the St. Jude Cancer Research. Ethan went after sponsors to make that trip happen. And the very first leg ended that dream when his engine developed problems. Ethan rolled up his sleeves and worked for the shop owner, learning to wrench, putting 300 hours into his mechanic logbook. And to me, and you're free to have your own opinions on this demonstrates that Ethan is not expecting handouts, but will put the time and effort in. After getting the plane back into service, Ethan changed the dream. No longer a record-breaking youth attempt for circumnavigating the globe, but to fly to all 7 continents solo to raise $1 million for St. Jude's. The plane that Ethan has available is a 50-year-old Cessna 182 Skylane. It's not his plane. Instead, he has leased it for the trip. The Skylane has a 6-cylinder large-bore engine. Onboard alterations include a total of 192 gallons capacity for fuel, 92 originally, and then he's got a 100-gallon ferry tank inside that pumps up to the left wing. For avionics, the plane has a Garmin G500 primary flight display. For navigation, the 650-750 combo. His autopilot is the Genesis S-Tech 3100. And for funding the trip, Ethan has relied on sponsors. All money donated to the cancer research goes straight to the charity. None of it has gone towards Ethan's trip expenses. In fact, he's been stuck along the way, waiting for support at times on his journey. Now, he took off from Memphis, M01, on May 24th, 2024, and headed east across the North Atlantic, then Europe, then down to Africa, across southern Asia, Australia, then up to Japan. And it has not been all smooth sailing. He's been stuck, detained. He's learned a ton. He's worked through problems and ordeals, like the Garmin G500 AHARS acting up through Asia. The AHARS, that's the Attitude Heading Reference System, started intermittently going out. And this is the device in your plane that tells the pilot what attitude the plane is in relation to the horizon and what heading you're on. And if you're flying visually, it's not a huge deal. But in the dark or in weather, you depend on it for your life. In Japan, he had the G500 replaced, and the technician signed off on it before Ethan undertook the perilous North Pacific crossing up into the Aleutians. Then it was all the way down to South America, which brings us to Punta Arenas, a city toward the bottom part of Chile. Ethan was approaching the last part of the quest. Antarctica was the last continent. And while he was able to visit children's hospitals in all the previous continents, there wouldn't be any, of course, in the frozen tundra of Antarctica. And here was his plan. Part of his team would film his departing Punta Arenas for the last repositioning to the Argentinian city of Ushuaia, the furthest southern city in the world, and the rest of his team awaited his arrival there. After landing Ushuaia, then the plan was to fly the 2.5 hours over the sea to Antarctica and land at the Argentinian base. At the time in late June, the daylight hours were down to under 5, and in the afternoon, the weather was turning bad. Ethan planned a morning departure from Punta Arenas in the darkness to arrive at Ushuaia in the daylight, but before the afternoon storms. He had filed all the necessary paperwork and permitting required for the trip to Ushuaia. You can see from his flight plans that it was his intention to go to Ushuaia and not King George Island. He had customs ready there in Argentina, connections, everything was set up. And I listened to the ATC recordings. Ethan was planning on traveling to Ushuaia. Taking off in the mountainous area around the Punta Arenas in the dark, several things happened to Ethan. He encountered some unreported icing, and his Garmin G500 AHARS went out. He had a backup attitude indicator he could use in the pitch darkness, but with icing, you want to climb or descend out of that layer to get out of the icing. In the mountains, descending in the darkness without reliable instruments was dangerous. Ethan told me he considered circling, but was concerned with spatial disorientation. And there were mountains between him and the other airports. So we flew straight and level, getting out of the icing in the mountains over the ocean to the south. It was still dark. He could try and turn towards Ushuaia, but he'd still have to circle there until the sun came up. And there's only a few airports in the vicinity, and one was closed and the mountains were between him and the other one. And the others were reporting marginal VFR or worse with icing. There were a variety of grass strips, but in the mountains in the dark, that was not going to happen. Ethan considered his choices for an hour as he did circle in the darkness, worried about the spatial disorientation. There was a landing strip 2.5 hours away with no mountains between him and it, King George Island, and the weather there was better than anything over the southern tip of South America. And that's where the trouble really began. First, Ethan tried his radio but couldn't get in touch with Chilean ATC.
November 182 Whiskey Tango radar service terminated. Report position at 0940.
Punta Arenas, November 182 is Tango. As we said, radar service terminated. I'll be circling around this area for the next couple of hours, and I'll be heading back. But I'll keep you updated. To it, Tango.
Ethan had a Starlink antenna in his plane, and through his cell phone, he made contact with the Chilean aviation authorities. He asked via WhatsApp text if he could land King George Island and was given a yes, and then a message to contact the tower there. He diverted from his flight plan and headed south to Chile's base on King George Island. When he got in range of their radio, he got permission to land from the tower as instructed. In his mind, everything's okay at this point.
November 182 Whiskey Tango, wind 240 degrees, 9 knots, cleared to land runway 29.
Clearly on only 292 is Tango.
But politically, there was a lot going on that didn't occur to Ethan. First, let's talk Antarctica. The least populated continent, but not the smallest, on the Earth. It contains the geographic South Pole, mostly covered by an ice sheet with an average thickness of 1.2 miles of ice. It's actually considered a polar desert. It's very dry, and it's governed by about 30 countries, and this is where politics come into play. Currently, 7 different countries claim sovereignty over the different regions, and few recognize each other's claims. So countries do things to solidify their claims, like setting up bases and stations and airfields all the way to getting pregnant women to give birth there so they can establish permanence. And certainly by arresting someone, you demonstrate that you politically control a region of Antarctica. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case here for Ethan Guo, but it needs to be mentioned that there are political elements in play here. Also, by not getting the proper permissions by the Chilean government and flying his small plane into a Chilean base, it has certainly embarrassed the Chilean Air Force as their next national election gets close. And the head of the Chilean equivalent to the FAA, the DGAC, is a Chilean Air Force general. Again, not saying these details are a factor. I'm just saying it's important to understand all these data points that could be impacting Ethan's plight. Now, King George Island is a part of the South Shetland Islands and rests 75 miles north of the Antarctica mainland. It contains stations belonging to Argentina, Brazil, Chile, China, South Korea, Peru, Poland, Russia, Uruguay, and the United States. Metallica performed a concert there in 2013. There is a small amount of tourism in the summer, which is December through March, and most of the stations are set up in an ice-free part of the island. The Chileans have the airport, the Teniente Rudolfo Marsh Martin Aerodrome, or MARSH for short, with a 4,200-foot runway. On the ground, after taxiing up, the people at the base told Ethan he should try and leave before the end of the day when the weather might get worse. He was even told that he could take off then. He had landed with plenty of fuel to fly back to South America, so he didn't need to top off the tanks. And with the avionics issue, he could do the flight visually, probably about 3 hours. But within an hour after landing, everything changed at the base, and Ethan found himself under arrest.
Everything was good for like an hour. Then they came up to me, and then they just told me to follow them. They didn't say a single word. Then they told me I was under arrest. I asked them, what am I under arrest for?
I've been able to call Ethan and get his side of the story. And for context, here's the other side of the story, what the Chilean press is saying. The formal arrest of the American citizen who was detained on Saturday after landing in Chilean Antarctica without prior authorization was finalized. The defendant, identified as Ethan Guo, was arrested on Saturday and brought before the court to be formally charged with crimes punishable under Articles 194, 197 of the Aeronautical Code. According to Christian Chrysostos, the regional prosecutor, the suspect, during the early morning of June 28th, piloted his Cessna 182Q aircraft, registration November 182 Whiskey Tango, reporting that he would take off from the Carlos Ibañez del Campo Airport in Punta Arenas and fly over the area. However, the information provided to the Aeronautical Authority was false. He submitted a flight plan indicating he was going to fly over the city of Punta Arenas. However, he continued on his way to Antarctica without any prior notice or authorization, landing at Marsh Airfield in Chilean Antarctica territory. With this conduct, the defendant seriously endangered the safety of air traffic to Antarctica and the region, which is why he was charged. And by the way, there haven't been any planes there, so I don't know about this interfering with aviation going to Antarctica. At the hearing, it was clear Ethan was stuck in Chile. His Cessna was impounded. The Chileans parked heavy equipment around it so Ethan wouldn't be tempted to fly away. And he was confined to a research station dorm on the military base, his quest now screeching to a halt. For breakfast, it's a little bread, beans and lentils for lunch and dinner. Internet is spotty. His 20th birthday came. His keepers found a little chocolate and improvised some sort of cake for him. But basically, he's in isolation, not allowed to go outside unless escorted. He's lost 20 pounds. He's had a bout of myocarditis. And Chilean prosecutors charged Ethan with 2 counts, providing false information to air traffic control and landing without authorization, violations of Article 133 of Chile's Aeronautical Code. The first carried up to 5 years in prison, and the second hefty fines. Ethan was formally arrested, though not jailed. He remained under house arrest at the base, monitored by Chilean Navy personnel. 6 continents conquered, but the 7th became a prison of ice. Partial resolution came on August 12, 2025 in a Punta Arenas courtroom with Ethan via video conference from his small room. Ethan's Chilean lawyer was able to get the ATC tapes, and based on that and other evidence like the WhatsApp message, which had been deleted and showed that it had been deleted, but showed permission by the head of the airport subdepartment of the DGAC that he could divert. A judge dropped the charges as part of a deal. Ethan would not be guilty, and Ethan agreed to donate $30,000 to a Chilean Children's Cancer Foundation and leave Antarctica immediately and cover any base costs. The $30,000 isn't coming from the fundraising because all of that goes to St. Jude's. Ethan will have to pay that himself. But leave immediately means something else apparently in South America. As of the taping of this report, they still won't let him depart. They claim the plane is unairworthy and it's winter, so boats and other aircraft are unavailable. So much for interrupting air service down to Antarctica. They can't even get a plane there now, they're saying. Ethan is stuck right now at the bottom of the world. In the meantime, the important part of his quest, almost $250,000 has been raised so far, but Ethan says most donations come at the very end, and certainly getting stuck in Antarctica is slowing that down. Look, I know some of you might say Ethan is just pulling a publicity stunt or even worse, using a charity to gain notoriety. But after researching this story and talking with Ethan and going through everything, I don't believe that's the case. I think his motive is a good one. And while he might be a bit naive and stepped into an international mess, and the aeronautical judgment of diverting to King George Island can be fairly questioned, he was a 19-year-old trying to do something good, and I give him that. Others might say that he took off from Punta Arena to go sneak in the trip to Antarctica, but I don't believe that's the case by looking at the evidence. He had the customs set up, a hotel and a crew set up in Ushuaia, Argentina. And Argentina is much looser on their Antarctica politics. We talked to some Argentinians about this, and they believe that had he gone to the Argentinian base, everything would have just been cool. So no, I don't believe Ethan took off from Punta Arenas with the plan to cross the ocean. And how will this story end? I don't know. Ethan wants to fly his 182 out. He's got the fuel, and on a VFR day, I believe it's not a problem. But the ending has yet to be written. If you want to help write the conclusion to this story, I'll include a link to donate to his cancer charity in the description below. I'll also have a link to his YouTube channel. And you can follow him on Instagram and TikTok. I'll put the handle right here. Courageous? Reckless? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. And I want to thank our sponsors like Colton Mortgage, coltontakingoff.com for your residential mortgage needs. It's run by a pilot. Their customer service is first class. And if you want to see our recent report on the NTSB hearing on the January 29th DCA midair crash that took 67 lives, you can check it out right here. Remember, superior judgment trumps superior skill. Take care.